G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Edward Mallett from Employsure, who's based in Sydney. Thanks for your time today, Edward.
No problem, Troy. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with how we know each other. A friend of mine, Charles Beaumont, who's the owner of the Importer furniture store down here in Tasmania. They've got 3 sites. He put us in touch because their business recently started using Employsure, I think in the last year or so.
That's right, yeah. So Charles has got a couple of businesses. He's also got the this cool business, Tasmanian hand sanitizer, which he set up through COVID and has done fantastically well in that. So, very lucky to count him amongst our clients.
Yeah, great. No, they've done really well. Matthew, Martin and Charles at Tasmania Hand Sanitizer, or M2 Logistics, they've done really well in less than a year now because of COVID, booting that business up, and it's been impressive to watch. So we'll have them on the cast, I think, on that business down the track sometime. So tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
So we're a business that helps small business with their workplace relations issues. Anyone that employs someone will know that unfortunately that comes with a headache at some stage. You can try and minimize those headaches by setting up properly with contracts and policies and so forth. And we aim to help our clients with that, setting up the employment relationship well, and then dealing with any headaches as they go through, right through to any clients that get sued for things like unfair dismissal or health and safety breaches. So we help them with all of that, and we do it on a subscription basis. So our clients sign up with us and pay us a monthly fee to deal with all those things for them.
So would it be fair to say like an outsourced HR department?
Broadly speaking, HR is one of those funny terms. Yeah. I think for small business, we can sometimes be a bit overwhelmed by it and think that it means things like cultural engagement, through to recruitment, and there are various other aspects of it. So sometimes if HR is a house, the very foundations of the house, workplace or employment relations, fundamentally getting right, how you treat your staff. We've all got to treat our staff what we call fairly and safely. Those are the 2 fundamental tenets of that relationship.
Yep.
And we help with that bit. So we deal with the foundations. What we don't do, because a lot of small businesses, frankly, just don't have the time to get to this, are some of the HR bits that bigger businesses would do around things like cultural engagement.
Yeah, and I think it's under-resourced in a lot of small businesses, particularly growing ones, because everyone's too busy to stop and put these foundations in place, which are so important, as you well know. Employment law and industrial relations law is getting more and more complex every year, which is a good thing because it's protecting employees and the employers as well, and obviously WorkSafe legislation, etc. So I think it's a really good service to be able to offer.
Thanks, Troy. It's interesting, and we'll no doubt talk about the COVID crisis in time, but just it was quite a revelation for me just to see how fundamental these issues are to businesses, particularly under times of stress like that. I often say when I do inductions, for example, for new staff at our place, that there is no such thing as a good business that doesn't treat their staff fairly and safely.
Yep.
And that's fundamentally what we help with. And in Australia, that includes things like making sure you just pay your staff the right amount. So, the basic premise of employment is that someone commits to give you their time, and in return, you're going to give them the right wage. And even that equation in Australia is just so flipping hard that you see it time and again with all these underpayment scandals and things like that. And if you're looking at it, some of those big companies that are getting caught underpaying, like Woolworths, you look at that and say, well, hang on, if they can't get it right, how can the average small business get it right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to bridge that gap, as well as the safety bit as well.
Yeah, great. How did you start out?
So I started out about Well, it depends. I'm sure a lot of people in small business have gone through this when you actually started or when you thought about starting, and then
Yeah.
then you procrastinate and think
Yeah.
up 100 reasons for not actually getting on with it. So officially speaking, I moved to Australia from the UK in 2010.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I'd been working in the UK as a barrister, specialising in employment law.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew the area pretty well in the UK. But what I'd seen in the UK is that the old-fashioned legal model of barristers and solicitors was being disrupted, albeit that I think back then, you know, the term disruption wasn't quite as common in business language as it is today. But they were being disrupted by these group of businesses that were doing subscription-based workplace relations advice. And I saw those businesses and I thought how interesting. And at about the time I was moving here with my wife, who's Australian, and we wanted to move over here and start a family and so forth. And I thought, you know what, I could carry on being a barrister over here. I'll have to go and do some more studying. But I think that that's a profession that's got problems in the space of employment law, and there's a better way to do it. How about I look at trying to set up one of these equivalent businesses that I've seen in the UK over in Australia.
And was the UK further down the road in this disruption, or had Australia really already started in this space, the disruption?
So disruption in this area, these businesses have interestingly been going for years. You know, so the biggest player in the UK is about 30 years old. And so they started well before anyone was talking about disruption. They were just trying to address a need in the market, which is that small business needs this help, probably more so than big business, but they can't typically afford to pay by the hour legal fees for it. So they end up not getting advice, trying to do it themselves, getting it wrong, sort of digging a hole that gets deeper and deeper. So these businesses have been growing up underneath lawyers' noses, and I suppose I use that phrase quite pointedly in that, you know, as a lawyer myself, I could say that, you know, we did tend to look down our noses a bit on anyone that didn't have a fancy degree from a fancy university, and we thought that what we did was oh so special that it couldn't be disrupted. But actually, these businesses had disrupted us without us even noticing, and that's what we've tried to do over here as well. In that, by the time I got here, the situation was very much where the UK had been a number of years before.
Yep.
The law hadn't, well, it actually only just changed. This thing called the Fair Work Act had come into play the year that I turned up. And that was just a bit of good fortune, really, from my perspective, in that suddenly this environment got created where I could see that small businesses were going to start getting sued for unfair dismissal at a rate that they never had before. And I could see that need for more and more advice was going to grow. So I was quite lucky having sort of had that UK experience, seen the model, and then I saw that there was this change in law in Australia that was going to create this environment where small business was going to need more help.
Right. It's a bit like the MYOB story. Craig Winkler, who's a Kiwi, started MYOB early 80s. It was 83. And then the Howard government brought GST in. Oh, geez, my memory's a bit rusty. In the early 90s, I think. And that really propelled, obviously, MYOB, that business, through the stratosphere. So that's really good timing and a bit of luck for yourself.
It is, yeah. I'm flattered to be likened to that. I have to say, it's an incredible business story. And I don't know it inside out, but I think Craig then went on to have some involvement with Xero as well. And it just sounds like an incredible business person.
Yeah, he sold out of MYOB, sold it to some investment wankers, and I believe, they stuffed up MYOB because they didn't get into the cloud quick enough. Xero in New Zealand had launched maybe 10 years ago, built for the cloud, and MYOB was brought kicking and screaming into the cloud. And after Craig sold out of MYOB, he started investing in Xero. He didn't found the business, but he was an early investor, and he's obviously made a shit ton of money out of it because they've grown so well.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? So yeah, to be in the same breath as those guys, and I suppose that brings back to the HR thing. You know, they're broadly an HR company as well, but yeah, we don't compete with MYOB. We're not a company in that that space of doing things like payroll technology.
Yep. So you landed 2010. The idea percolated, I'm guessing, for a year or two. So what year did you actually start the business?
So I incorporated it that year. Then I got a taste for Australian coffee and coffee shops, and spent a lot of time procrastinating, trying to work out what a business plan was and all the other things that go with starting up your own business. And then we got our first client in April 2011.
Right.
And when I say we, that's the what might be called the royal we. That was just me
Yeah.
sitting in the spare bedroom of the apartment we were renting, and yeah, we took on our first client, which is still a client today. Actually, a company called the Kitchen Food Group. It's a great company that at the time was creating sandwich packs and things for some of the big airlines. And they had a food processing outlet essentially in Alexandria, just near Sydney.
Yep.
And they needed some help with wage rates and also some cultural challenges that you see in small business a lot. So they had a lot of immigrant workers doing that work, putting together sandwiches and things like that. And just they were starting to get challenges with language barriers and things like that, the sort of things that do occur as businesses grow.
Great. And so 2011, how old were you when you decided to make the leap into small business?
So I was, I think, 31 then. Just over my 30th birthday. So it all happened in quick succession. I hit 30. I eventually plucked up the courage to ask my wife to marry me, and then moved here and got going with this.
Great. And do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business over the almost 10 years now?
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate to have grown both in Australia, and then we launched in New Zealand 4 years ago now as well. So we've grown from just me in that spare room to we've just gone over 1,000 employees. So we've
Holy
got about
shit,
1,000.
really? That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So,
Well done. Congratulations.
thank you very much, Troy. Yeah, we've got 1,050 employees, I think the number is right now. We've grown from again scratch to we turn over about $200 million now a year.
Wow.
So it's we've been very fortunate in finding a market that really was underserving small business, as well as a need that's, to be honest, arguably greater than what I saw in the UK, particularly around this wage rate stuff, where businesses really just need help. So they pay us an average of about $500 per month each.
Yep.
And in that way, we've got about 28,000 small businesses now that we deal with day to day.
Edward, that is phenomenal growth, particularly the FTE, over 1,000 staff in just under 10 years. Obviously, specializing in this area, I guess, does help. But that aside, that is amazing growth. I'm just in awe at that.
Thanks, Troy. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's certainly, it comes with bumps and bruises, as we'll probably talk about. But I used to have a great head of hair. Now I look a lot more like you, Troy.
Yeah,
that's one of the downsides of it.
Yes, yeah, that's right. The audience can't see me at the moment. My beard is very long. My daughter said I look like Father Christmas the other day. So, and my bald head. So, yeah. I've got a lot of grey hair these days after 21 years in small business. But yeah. And when was the moment you felt like you'd succeeded?
Good question. I chew on this a fair bit, to be honest, because I've been through a journey. I remember before we even moved to Australia, my wife and I remember talking to her about leaving my old job, which I loved, by the way. I didn't really enjoy swanning around in a wig and gown, and I could just see this problem though that needed solving. And at that time, I really thought success was going to be financial, and I had this sort of figure in my mind of, if I get the business to X value, then that's amazing. And then probably with age as much as anything, I've sort of changed my view on what that looks like. And I've then ended up enjoying things in the business that I didn't know that I'd enjoy. That, growing, not just the number of people, but the people within the business. I was just on the phone this morning to one of our most senior employees who's been with us almost since day one. And she has not only grown in her role, which is incredible now. I reckon she's got the biggest job in HR in the whole of ANZ. she's barely 30 and she has 400 people in her department reporting to her, and she's gone from coming in as an individual contributor to that.
Wow.
And I just think it's a really cool story to have spent time, not just career time, but when she joined us, she was in her mid-20s, and is now early 30s, and that's a long period of her life as well, to actually spend that time growing together as people, as professionals, is pretty cool. So I started to see sort of, I suppose, elements of things like that as being success. And then actually just over Christmas, as I'm sure a lot of people do, I was reflecting a bit. I was reading quite a cool book by a chap called Ray Dalio, who's an investor. He's got his book called Principles, which
Charles actually put me onto that book when I
did
him on the podcast early on.
So it's Ray probably doesn't need me promoting his book. I think he's done well enough in life about that. But he's quite early in the book, he said that the way in which he works is to define what he considers success. Then he works backwards to work out which of those things you can actually pay for and which aren't possible to achieve through financial gain. And that sort of struck a chord with me, and I thought that sums up quite well the journey I've been on from that day when I was, say, 30, to thinking it was all about some sort of successful exit, to now where I am, which is actually there's so many more layers to business and to life in general which bring you success, many of which have got nothing to do with your P&L or how much someone will pay you for the business.
Yeah. And well, that's the next question. What does success look like to you?
So on a personal level, I'm married, I've got 3 kids now. If I can bring them up in a way that creates the value set that I think has enabled me to go on the journey I'm on. And that sounds a bit fluffy, but roughly what I mean is, like a lot of people, I set a lot of stall by what my parents taught me, and things like my honesty value, my hard work ethic, things like that. If I can convey that to my children, both through what I do and how I behave around them, then great. That's a pretty good starting block.
Yeah.
If I can then set up a world in which I can support them in a way that I think gives them the best opportunity in life, that's a second tick. If I can do all of that whilst persuading my wife to stick around with me, then I've probably done a lot.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Interesting. I think this is a really big part of my journey. So if you'd asked me on day one what marketing was, I'd really struggled to explain it. And I might not be able to put it in a nutshell now, but what I was definitely doing then was undervaluing it.
Me too.
I was convinced then that great businesses were all about product. And like a lot of people, I'd read sort of the stories about, businesses like Facebook and these amazing unicorns that they've somehow struck this incredible sort of rich vein in their mining for success, I suppose, which means that they've got a product that falls off the shelf and you don't need to sell it. In some people that will happen to at some stage. I think that's a pretty rare set of business circumstances. But I didn't know that at the time, and I'd come from this world which was very old-fashioned. Being a barrister, not it was so old-fashioned and so sort of anti-concept of marketing and sales that. To give an example, we weren't allowed to carry business cards. That was seen as too pushy to hand those out. So I had this view that the quality of the service would sell itself. And don't get me wrong, that's you've still got to make sure at its heart that the product is delivering what you say it will. But I came to understand and learn actually through my investor the importance of marketing and sales. So. What's the number one thing about marketing is, I suppose it's recognizing how that you most likely won't have a business until you understand what your marketing and sales model is.
Yeah, great. And on that comment you made before about you just got to have a great product and it'll sell itself, there's a great case study, VHS versus Beta. I don't know if you know that story, but it was the old videotape formats, and VHS obviously won out in the end because Beta was a better, more superior product from Sony, but they just didn't market it. They kept a very closed system, and VHS won out at the end of the day, even though it was not as good a product as Beta.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and you see it time and again in business. I think that, I think, I look at, it's a great Aussie success story, that Atlassian business.
Yes.
But one of the things that grates me a bit was when I hear the founders sort of stand up and they wear as a badge of pride that they don't have a sales team. And I've got a real thing against this concept that for some reason your business isn't great if you need to push it. Like that's, and or that sales is somehow some sort of icky word. Like the reality is, the vast majority of businesses, unless you get selling and understand how to market your product, you'll lose.
For me, a big part of marketing is also customer service or satisfaction. Do you have any indicators you use to track the happiness of your 28,000 customers?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time on this. It's a really interesting one, I think, Troy, that we have sort of two sides of the same coin, which is something that I think a lot of people have to deal with in today's reality. So we obviously want feedback from our customers to understand how we're doing, and what we could improve on, most importantly. But second to that, there's this thing called the World Wide Web, where customers will freely give you feedback. And quite often, unfortunately, you'll get distorted feedback on there. So you sort of have this element of needing to brand manage as well by making sure you're taking that feedback, managing it well. So we're constantly in this sort of balance between what you'd hope is true, transparent feedback versus managing your brand with the distorted stuff. And I suppose I'm flagging that. I just think it's a fascinating thing that as we've grown, it's been one of my biggest challenges, is sort of staying true and honest in the business, but making sure that you're protecting your brand through that feedback and the importance of that versus going out and getting that real feedback. So it's a constant strain for me, and I expect other business owners, being a small business owner and waking up to find you've got a crappy Google review. They're the sort of the cuts and bruises that really hurt, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And how did you fund your business?
I did it myself initially, so I spent about 12 months after that launch in April 2011, bootstrapping, I suppose. So using my savings, I obviously didn't take an income, which won't be any surprise to anyone that's set up their own business. And then after about a year, I got it to, I suppose, proof of concept, you might say. And I have this sort of staging in my mind that any business idea, you've got to first of all get it going and prove the concept, and then once you've done that, you're in execution risk. And that execution period is much easier to invest in for people, I think. So once I got to that stage, I first of all started sort of touting my wares around Sydney and speaking to VC funds and things like that. And I realized quite quickly that, this was 10 years ago now, that even then what I was pitching was a pretty unsexy proposition to a world that was looking for the next internet thing. And I was basically going in and saying, we're going to be a really people-heavy business if I get this right. And we're going to deal with people's HR. And maybe I'm just
a lot of complexity there. Yeah,
it's a complexity, people-heavy. We use tech, but I'd be fibbing if I said we were a tech company. So I realised it was a pretty unsexy proposition, and I probably didn't need that realisation myself, because I got it through them when they kept saying no to investment. But so I thought, what the hell do I do? I was running out of money. I remember vividly squirreling off from our office. By then we were about 6 employees, and I went and Googled administrator and rang them.
Oh no, it came that close, really?
Yeah, and I was clueless. I was like, what do I do if I've run out of money? And And then I started talking to, I thought, okay, I'm going to, I cold called the founder of the biggest version of what we do in the UK.
Yeah.
And I remember he was getting on a plane to go somewhere, and I pitched him and just said, his name's Peter. I said, Peter, you don't know me, but I've nicked your business idea and set it up in Australia. I think it's going well. Could do better. I'd love to know how to grow it and speak to you about that. And he's one of the greatest entrepreneurs you'll ever meet, Peter. And he listened to me, and we grew the relationship, and they invested shortly after.
Right.
And couldn't have had a better investor, to be honest, because there's so many times that a VC or a professional investor would have screwed me.
Yep.
And these guys never did. They just, every step of the way, they nurtured the business and so on.
Well, also it's smart money. Peter brings experience. The model obviously is well tested in the UK, and they're already operating there. And yeah, that's a very very good move there, Edward. Well done.
Yeah. And it was sort of luck and circumstance in many ways. Remember after we'd been doing all the negotiation, and probably my lawyer head started coming back, and I was tripping myself up. And I remember my wife, as I was packing my bag to go to the UK, hopefully to do the deal, and she turned to me and just said, "Just do the effing deal." And she was right. I just needed to not overcomplicate it. I needed to have faith, and also optionality was low, frankly, but they didn't take advantage of that in the end, and that was the first step on a very healthy relationship.
Great. Good. Any other funding through the journey, bank finance or grants?
No, so we've been very lucky. So they put an initial lump of money via equity. I say I've been very lucky in that we then, having realised it was going quite well, we wanted to put our foot down and therefore needed more money. I remember chatting to Peter again at the time, and I said, Peter, I'm out. I don't have any more money. I used up all my savings. They'd agreed when they came in to pay me an income, and I said, look, how about this? How about I go back to zero income?
Yep.
And you guys don't dilute me. And Peter, and this sort of sums up the kind of guy he is, turned around and said, Ed, that's all I needed to hear. You'll carry on getting your income. I'm just going to invest now by way of debt.
Yep.
And so he then put in the additional investment by debt, which then fortunately we've got to the stage now that we've paid back and been able to fund our growth in New Zealand.
That's great. And I think this really talks to the point of choosing your investors wisely.
Yeah.
Get the right investors on board. It's not just your fellow team members or managers in your business, but if you've got dickhead shareholders or investors or people that just are really there for the wrong reasons, just to make money, and not have the right attitude to life and business, can really mess things up. So you've chosen wisely.
Well, yeah, and again, circumstance. I tried. I remember going to one of the banks, one of the big four, and saying, "Could I speak to someone about a small business loan?" And I sort of got laughed out of there. So I don't know how anyone gets small business loans.
I think it's a myth.
When I hear of people with them, I'm like, that's amazing. I couldn't. It wasn't even that they read my business plan and said it was rubbish. They just didn't. They sort of looked at me like I was. They were going to ring up the loony bin and get me sent off.
Yeah. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
I would. I think there's a great opportunity still there for us. We've grown to that 28,000 clients. I think there's lots more to do though, and also we've got to deal with challenges going forward that would means that we could scale better through technology and things. So there's still lots of opportunity. I'd still, if I had lots of funding, I would still, if I was the 30-year-old Ed that started off thinking the thing was going to fall off the shelves, I would still give away the same amount of equity to get the funding from the partner that I've had though.
Yeah, great.
I'd do it all again exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Even if I had personally had the money.
And can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
Believe it or not, I don't think ringing the administrator was the most stressful point. COVID's obviously had its stresses. Yeah, I remember having another sort of dramatic moment coming home and telling my wife that I just wasn't sure what was going to happen. Would our clients all go bust overnight and stop paying us? Would they need our services? That was a pretty, and I don't think any of us have really realised yet quite how depleting, let's say, last year was on us.
Yeah.
To have those incredible lows with, in our case, we've been very fortunate that we've been on the right side of the ledger, really, and that sense of relief as well. Those are pretty in terms of depleting you. That will be a big life event, I think. But I listened once to a business guy that founded that TRX gym equipment.
Oh yeah.
And he described running a business as being, he said, imagine it like you've got a bag of mojo, he called it. And your job as the business owner is to defend that bag of mojo, and people will try and get past you to cut it open.
Yep.
And then on a number of occasions they will, and they'll get little nicks in the bag and your mojo will start to seep out. Your job as a business owner is to stop it going down to zero, at which stage you're done. You kind of, as to your question, is the most challenging bit. I think that there's just been consistent times where I haven't been able to protect the bag of mojo, and COVID was one, ringing the administrator was another. Having a scrap with an employee is one, given what I do for a living. I want to make sure that my own backyard's in good order as well.
Yeah.
There's been a lot that I've been through, and I suspect they've been very similar to the ones that your other guests and listeners go through as well.
Yeah. And what area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Sales and marketing, I would say, because that just wasn't my area. I not by design, but by stumbling into a bit of luck. Aside from getting the right investor, the approach I took early on was I hired people to do the things that I could already do.
Yep.
Which might seem a bit odd. I know a lot of business books would advocate going out and getting people with skills you don't have and sort of trusting them to get on with it. But I went out and hired, the first people I hired were advisors to give advice to our clients.
Yep.
And I still did a bit of it myself, but then I had to go out and learn what marketing was, what sales was in our industry. And I had to have, I suppose, be humble enough to accept that my investors just knew much more than me on that, and just see it as a very fortunate learning opportunity. So that's the area I had to work on. And then in time, I suppose, learning to appreciate the people that we hired that do things I just can't.
Yeah.
To give an example, someone that sits in one of our sales contact centers to be, speaking to, on any given day, they try and speak to about 20 to 30 businesses a day each. I personally would find that pretty hard. I'm quite introverted, and I just find that just shattering, just to constantly be speaking to people, getting forms of rejection, that sort of thing would be really difficult for me. But I had to learn to understand and appreciate exactly what those guys with very different characters can bring.
Yeah. And what have you enjoyed the least about managing the fast growth?
Some of the bigger bumps and bruises or cuts to the mojo bag. So I have those moments where I go home and you just sort of check in with yourself. Am I sticking to my values here? Have I done the wrong thing by someone? And that could be something that might seem at the smaller end of the scale. You're getting a bad review. I want everything to be perfect. It's the thing that I've chucked everything into professionally. I want the service to be perfect. So if we stuff up and we get a bad review, that really hurts. Equally, if we get a regulator knocking on our door and saying, "What's this? Are you guys real?" But again, I feel like that's a sort of affront to my values a bit.
Yeah.
That well, what do you think? I'm not sort of setting up some sort of phony thing. And in every variation of that in between, I suppose, where you just have to check in and say, have I stayed on the right path? Because I think it's healthy to take things personally. it means that you are living by your values, but it does mean that you will get depleted by certain events as well. And those are the things I've found hardest, when people have doubted the validity or the purpose of what we've done with Employsure.
And what do you love most about growing a small business?
Things that I didn't realise I would. So I mentioned earlier about the culture bit. Bear in mind, I'd never managed anyone before I set up the business. So having to go on that journey of learning how to grow it from one employee to today's number of 1,050 odd, that's been a leadership journey in trying to learn how to inspire people during that process and build a culture that ends up self-sustaining as well. I didn't know that I'd enjoy that stuff, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed that. And when I had that conversation with Lou, who I mentioned earlier, I just think that's a lot of what it's now about for me, just to see how well she's done and see the life that she's consequently able to live and so on. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to do as a business owner, I think.
Yeah, great. And what's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
So that mindset, I don't know if we'll talk about this later, but I find like a lot of the time when I read and listen to things about business, they talk about how much money someone makes or the exit or something like that. And I kind of went at that point, I tend to think, oh, that's a bit weird. I've now gone from that conversation I had from my wife before I started the thing up, where I was sort of like, if I get to this amount of money, then that will equal success.
Yeah.
To now actually finding it a bit weird when that gets asked, that I don't, so it's giving you a bit of a heads up not to ask it maybe, but I don't, that mindset shift of what business is about, it's not, to me, it's not about building something and flogging it, as in the business entity. It's about something else. And you've all got to actually enjoy the process, not just the outcome.
Yeah. It's the journey, not the destination. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Resilience, I'm going to say.
Yep.
I'm sounding pretty bloody negative. I'm talking about mojo bags and cuts and bruises, and maybe that's just the way it is. But
you sound like most small business owners that I speak with.
Oh, that's a relief. Resilience. I'd say just dealing with, and in that, having the ability to rise up above the noise, not to ignore it. But just to rise up and not let it suck you down. So I'd say that's been the hardest thing for me to learn over time, that it will never. And I hope I'm pretty aware of how fortunate we've been to grow as much as we have. And to an outsider, you might say, "Oh well, what a great business success story," and I don't doubt that. But that would ignore all the challenges that go with doing that. I was lucky enough to meet the other day. I went out for a coffee with the guy that founded F45 gyms, and just what an amazing. It's one of the great Aussie success stories of recent years. He's just left actually, and it was just interesting to talk to him, just knowing that he doesn't speak to that many people that have waded through the stuff that we have to get to where we are. Most people would assume that it's all success and no problems, but it's probably more problems than success in many ways.
Jump over to growasmallbusiness.com and leave your details to get a short 2-minute email I send on Fridays to help small business owners like you become better leaders. I include some reading or professional development resources I've discovered in the last week. Now, this next question, you are the perfect guest to answer. Can you talk about how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yes, I can. So believe it or not, I might be a self-professed employment relations expert, but that's slightly different to hiring the right people. So what I started off by doing, so never sort of didn't have a very formal interview structure or anything like that. Um, I was doing though what I now know to have been testing people's values. So I'll give you a couple of small examples about that. So one thing I'm absolutely fixated with, and I try to drive into our culture in the business, is what we call putting your manager in the pocket, which we use that sort of NFL quarterback imagery of a quarterback having time to do their job because you're protecting them properly. And one of the things that is so small that we have a zero tolerance on is lateness. So I just won't interview people that turn up even a minute late for an interview.
I'm the same.
I just won't. I just got no interest in hearing the bullshit excuse about how they got caught in traffic or whatever. And I'll probably miss some good people that did genuinely have an unforeseen event. But most of the time, I'll capture the people that I would never have worked with well anyway, because it's not just I think the wrong person would see that as a sort of a micromanagey thing. The way I see it is that your day-to-day behaviours are the way in which you live your values, your behaviours, your values in action. And if you think that's all right, there's going to be a whole host of other things that you do in your behaviours that mean that we're probably not aligned in values. And so what I was doing is trying to identify values, and another value for me personally is hard work. Just always giving your best to something, however you want to describe it. And so what I'd often do in interviews is create a bit of homework almost for them to do beforehand. I'd do that informally, in that an obvious question at the start would be, tell me what Employsure does. And if they couldn't answer that in a way that meant that they at least looked at the bloody website, they're probably not the right person again.
That is the first question I ask in interviews as well. Tell us about our business. What do you know about our business?
It's again, so simple. It's not rocket science, but it also stops you from doing what we all do as business owners and gushing about our businesses and talking about them. Then I normally at the second stage of an interview, I'd give them this bit of homework. They'd have to come in with a presentation, and anyone that didn't do it well or it's clearly undercooked it, just wasn't that invested in the idea of working for us, in my view.
And you'd also find some people pull out of that stage too, which saves you time.
Spot on. So what were all those things? They were all values tests, really. And the way we formalize that now is that we have our own company values, and we measure people in interviews against those values. We also measure people once they're in the door. Every quarter you get measured on how you're performing against company values. And we have what we call a performance equation that we use from interview going forward in the employment relationship, where we say that at Employsure, your performance equals your capability, your ability to do the job, to actually get the things done you need to do, multiplied by your values squared. I'm no mathematician, but what that obviously does is distorts the importance of values, increases the importance of values, so that they are considered by us to be more important than your capability. We see capability as something we can teach and learn. And Lou, who I'm giving a lot of airtime to today, but should be a classic one, having started for us in a subject matter expert role. She came in as an ER expert. She's now a manager of 400 people. She didn't have that capability at the start, but Lou's got values coming out of her ears. She's very strong on that.
That's great. I assume you would have read Jim Collins' Built to Last and Good to Great.
I've read Good to Great. I have to admit, I haven't read Built to Last yet. I need to get onto it.
Yeah, it was before Good to Great. 18 visionary companies like Sony, Disney, each had a comparison company. It was amazing. And their thesis was to find what made them different to those comparison companies. So the comparison companies, each company had to be founded before 1950. They had to be listed so they could easily study them. But what they found was the comparison companies outperformed their local stock market twofold, but the visionary companies outperformed their comparison companies sevenfold. So like 14 times the stock market. And they wanted to unearth why that was. Was it a was it a charismatic leader, a great product, brilliant strategy, and it was none of that. And you know, Jim Collins is pretty much the godfather of the values and vision, the values and the vision, mission, etc. And that is so important to the growth of a long-standing, sustainable, successful company, and one that, you know, people want to work in. So yeah, go back and read the first one. It's a brilliant book.
I will. I love the way he writes, but it's very accessible, I find, for me anyway. But yeah, I mean, the way we try to, on the aside from values, we have another methodology that we try to drive our mission or vision into the business. And by the way, I should say that, like, a lot of these words have taken me a hell of a lot of time to understand what they actually mean in practice. You know, I feel like business is sort of occupied by a lot of words that can confuse a bit, and we're all a bit too afraid just to admit that. So I've had to work out what my version of vision or mission is, and what we use instead of talking about that is we have what we call a why, how, what structure. And we try and use it in all facets of the business. And you are required, essentially, if you want to make some change, you want to spend some money, you want to come and pitch an idea, to put everything on one page, which starts with why. Why are you doing this? What's the either vision or mission? How are you going to do it? What's the strategy? What are you going to do? What's the plan?
Yep.
And that discipline starts with me. So I do that for the business each year. I say, this is our mission. So for us, you know, our mission is to help small business, starting with fair and safe workplaces. And I say starting, I suppose pointedly, because we believe we'll then expand into other services that also help small business. We'd love to turn into, like, you know, an EY or KPMG for small business, where you say, I need some help with something. Okay, I'll go to those guys. So that's the why, and then each year I explain the how and the what. What's the strategy, which stays pretty similar each year, and then we go into the what. And then when we had COVID, for example, I developed another why, how, what with my leadership group that we announced to the business, and we just then used that language and repeated it throughout the COVID crisis, actually on a daily basis, in different messages and so on, so that everyone knew exactly what our mission was through COVID, how we were going to achieve it, and what success looked like. And you know, it's not perfect, but that's my version of the interpreting, having visions, mission statements, and so on. I think particularly as you scale, it's important because you create culture through commonality of purpose, commonality of language, all of those sorts of things. And you need to be able to know as a leader what the purpose is, what the language is, what the values are. And I got a bit of a rude awakening with that when we were at about 30 staff. I remember someone saying to me that this, you know, why are we all here? What it is? What are we doing here? You know, which is, I suppose, another way of saying, what's the mission? And I sort of remember looking at them and thinking, are they mad? Like, we're all working our asses off growing this thing. It's plainly obvious, isn't it, what we're doing? You know, I sort of self-reflected and thought, you know what, they're spot on. I know exactly what the purpose is.
But you hadn't communicated.
But I haven't communicated it, and I know why I turn up every day. And actually, when we really went into the exercise of working out the why, my individual purpose was slightly different. It's aligned with the help small business, but I also had this desire to disrupt or stick two fingers up at the old-fashioned legal services industry. But most people didn't in the business. You know, they weren't all lawyers that knew that problem or had a bad experience with lawyers or whatever. That wasn't massively engaging. We realised that we were doing something bigger than that, and that was a really important process to go through that and understand it.
Yeah, I'm guessing you've read Simon Sinek's books and seen his TED Talk on why.
Seen the TED Talk, you can probably hear that I've stolen a bit of his work.
The golden circle.
I'm pleased you've saved us from any plagiarism suits by flagging that.
Just before we close out on just before we close out on adding people to the team, what you said before about behaviour, about people turning up on time for an interview, Just reminding you of one of my favourite Aristotle quotes. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. I think that's so important. What about, moving on to the next one, what are some things you would recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
So it does, using the Cynic stuff and so forth, it does start with understanding exactly what the purpose is, the why, then deriving from that, or allied to that, having a very clear set of values, and not just shoving them on the wall and putting them in a drawer. So whatever it is, you've got to live them somehow. So you've got to work out how to interpret those into a set of behaviours. Now, if you get that right, what you get out of the bottom of the funnel, I suppose, if you start with values and that behaviours become values in action, you end up at the bottom with a series of commitments if you've got a really good culture. In my view, and different cultures have different interpretations of this, but at the bottom of it, you get these commitments, which are people don't see turning up on time as a small example, as a chore. That's deep in the muscle memory, and that's what they do, and we all do that here, and so on. Doesn't feel micromanaged, doesn't feel top down. And if you look at that in different cultures, so where you've got, let's say, a military culture, you've got very high values.
Yep.
The behaviours are very literal. They're quite constrained. And what you get at the bottom of the funnel is a set of rules rather than commitments. I must get back to my dormitory by 8 p.m. or else, that, and people tend to not necessarily be as committed to them. That's not a bad culture necessarily. It's right for the version for what they do. Mm-hmm. If the military tried to do culture like Google or someone does it, they'd probably not be very good at their job. But as a business, I've tried to find some sort of middle ground between the two. Our culture is not purely organic. We create this structure so people know from day one what our values are and what we expect of them. If they don't want to adhere to that, they can self-select out. That's no problem. Yep. What we want is a group of people that want to share values and share those behaviours. And ultimately, if you think about going back to that recruitment question, I always think of recruitment as like a sort of weird, old-fashioned form of dating, like in a professional environment. It's sort of, I've been out of the game for a while. I appreciate now that if you want to date, you just get an app and swipe right or left or whatever you do. But back in the day that I did go out on a handful of dates, I thought the understanding was that you'd sit in a coffee shop or restaurant and basically you were interviewing each other and trying to work out what each other's values are. And you were basically saying, are your values the same as mine? And the interviewee's saying, hang on, does this company believe in the same things I do?
Yeah.
But no one ever, just like dating, no one ever expressly articulates that. Everyone's too coy.
Yes.
And ultimately what you're trying to do is find those people who will click. Not so you get a sort of homogenous culture full of people who are exactly the same. That's not the idea, but the idea is you get people that will work together. They might look and sound and even behave slightly differently, but they come from the same starting point.
Yeah. And tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Between work and life and so forth.
Yeah.
I've either done it really badly or I've done it really well. I don't know the answer. Really, I'll let you and the audience judge on that. But I don't, like a lot of people in small business, I don't see there as being a separation. I'm totally immersed in my business. Funnily enough, my kids this morning asked me, I got in my car to go to work, and it's not a branded company car. And my kids said to me, why don't you get an Employsure car, Dad? It would be so much better than your one. And it's probably right that they're so immersed in that idea of the business and so on that they understand that there's not really a point in which doing business finishes. And I try to do that in a way that's healthy. I try to explain to my kids I love my job. I really feel very privileged with it. I never have a day that I have a day where I feel knackered, believe me, and don't want to go into work on that basis, but there's nothing that I want to shirk in work. So I don't really see it as a balancing exercise. I see it as an extension, really, and trying to live a life that it doesn't have that friction between the two.
Yeah. And how much professional development have you invested in yourself over the years?
I've never done a business degree or anything like that. What I have had to do is self-develop. Running a business with just myself is very different to what my job is today, but my job title stayed the same from day one. I literally remember calling myself managing director on the first business plan.
Yep.
And choosing that ahead of CEO, because CEO just sounded a bit too fancy for someone sitting in a spare bedroom. So I'd no other logic than that. But I've had to go from going into the office at weekends and doing the cleaning to working out how to inspire over 1,000 people. And I've done that by this mechanism. I think I've done a lot of reading. Not enough. You just called me out on a book I haven't read, but I do a lot of listening, do a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, good.
I do. I then have sort of three main structural planks, I suppose, in my week that, in terms of mentoring of sorts, and that I speak once a week to Peter, the CEO of Peninsula, the company that invested in us.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that as a massive privilege. Like the guys, you probably won't thank me for saying this out loud online, but he's a self-made billionaire.
Yeah.
And who gets the chance to speak to a self-made billionaire once a week and pick their brains? I just think, what I've had now 10 years to be able to do that, which is just incredible. Then I also go for a walk once a week with a mate who I met in a coffee shop when we were both pretending to write business plans.
At least you're honest.
He set up a business around the same time, and he's the opposite of me. He's a proper entrepreneur with kind of all of my self-reflecting about bruises and bumps and the downside. He'd be responding to your questions, saying, "I don't know what you mean. This thing's bloody awesome." He just seems to have some sort of suit of armour that he doesn't get affected like I do by things. So he straightens me out once a week, and then finally I have I suppose professional support in that in a former life a long time ago I used to play rugby professionally. And at that time I had a performance coach, sports psychologist, whatever you'd want to call them, and when I was beginning to feel overwhelmed at Employsure, when we were sort of moving into the hundreds of employees and things like that, I thought, shit, who do I turn to here? I can't really ring Peter and say that. That's not going to help him as an investor to have confidence. So I picked up the phone to my old performance coach, who's still back in the UK, but I have a very fixed time once a week that I speak to him for an hour. I do a video call with him, which is, it's a big indulgence, just sort of having that chance to just talk about yourself for an hour. But it's a really valuable one for me. I can tell when I've missed it in a week, I can tell from my performance that I've missed it.
That's great. Any other mentors or coaches? That was the next question.
I look within family and things. I was my father-in-law is an excellent businessman, and I suppose he sort of opened up my eyes a bit in that. Honestly speaking, I'd grown up in a very fortunate middle-class environment in the UK. I became a lawyer because that's the sort of thing that was expected to do if you grew up in that environment. And I thought I'd sort of reached the peak of the mountain that I wanted to climb at that stage. And then meeting my now wife and her family. Dad was an entrepreneur, and just speaking to him and just saying, shit, there's a whole world out there that no one ever told me about. They don't come around to universities in England and tell you could go out and make widgets and sell them and be really successful in life. I just didn't. I had very limited exposure in life to business people, and he really opened me up to that. So there's been a mentor relationship there as well, I suppose.
And do you have a board of directors or advisors at the moment?
We have a board of directors in the business. It's very much run like a private company, though, in the sense that I'd say that they are strategic discussions, but both Peter and myself know more about the business than your average board member would. I'd say we're very focused on not just quarterly figures, but daily sales results and things like that. So it's a board of directors that has a number of people from Peter's trusted group in the UK, and then over time we've built it up with a local board as well, people that have grown through the business typically.
So how many on the board and how often does it meet?
We meet quarterly. We're absolutely religious about that, have been since day one. We've always wanted to have, I suppose, the corporate structure of the business that we wanted to become.
Right.
So it ends up being about 4 or 5 hour meeting once a quarter. And in total at the board meeting, there's 10 people.
Yep. Right.
Used to be 3 people, is now 10.
Yep. Good. All right, Ed, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
The letting go bit to some degree. It certainly has been for me. As an ex-lawyer, you sort of tend to become a lawyer. You've got that sort of fussy perfectionist streak. So acknowledging that things won't always be perfect, that's a necessary precursor, I think, to being able to delegate and scale.
Yeah.
So that for me personally, that's been very hard.
And favourite business book which has helped you the most?
You gave me the heads up about this question, so it gave me a chance to think about it. And it's that book, Hard Thing About Hard Things by, I think it's Ben Horowitz.
It is Ben Horowitz, yeah. It's really a great book.
Just because, like your podcast, it cuts through the bullshit and says, this is actually what it's like. This is the moment, his version of ringing the administrator that day. And
I love that line in the book where he says, if you've got to eat shit, don't nibble. I.e., if you've got a shit situation, you need to make a decision on, make it fast and get on with it. Yeah.
I love that book. I could easily say, to be honest, it's whichever one I've read most recently. I tend just because they always stick in mind, and then hopefully the core messages seep into the system. But I read the book about WeWork recently, which was really fascinating.
Sorry, which one was that? Sorry?
It's about WeWork, the office leasing company.
That imploded, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And it's a real beat up of the guy at the heart of it. And as a business owner, I read it with a bit of sympathy to him. I mean, he did some knobbish things, undoubtedly. He was spending money like it was going out of fashion. But it's written for consumer consumption, I suppose, where it's just looking at it and saying, now that it's imploded, we can all take the piss out of him for having such a big vision.
Yeah.
And you're like, hang on a second, as business owners, that's what we need to do. Like, you can't, just because he wanted to change the world doesn't mean that automatically he's some sort of bullshitter.
Yeah.
It's just that he didn't manage it, that you're now all taking the piss out of him for. So it's, that was quite an interesting thing from it. What stage do you go from being Steve Jobs visionary to being a bullshitter that doesn't make it? It's a difficult one for any ambitious business owner, I think.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your professional development?
I love How I Built This.
I
think it's the NPR one. Guy Raz. I listen to Masters of Scale pretty religiously. That's another good one. It's not as good, to be honest. That's a bit more, he interviews all these amazing Silicon Valley types, which quite often they sort of say, tell us your success story, and they're still in shock. They're like, honestly, I don't know, I'm a billionaire, but I've got no idea how it happened. So that's less interesting than the Guy Raz one's a bit more real. And then I dip in when I hear a really cool story that I like. So, for example, the guy that founded Lululemon, I found that really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I then use the search tool to go and find other podcasts on Lululemon.
Right.
And that takes me down all sorts of rabbit holes where I then ended up listening to one by the CEO that took over from him when he got ousted from the company, and that's really interesting to hear how she scaled it. And that's a bit of a trick of the trade, I suppose. To if you like certain stories, see if you can find out more about them.
Yeah, Lululemon's a great brand and a great growth story as well. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
One tool that I'd recommend to help grow a small business, I'd say for me, financial discipline. So, looping around, like you could say that's some bit of software like my old story we talked about at the start. But I think more importantly, it's having the discipline from day one to have a reporting framework, a good bookkeeper maybe at the start, moving into accountant, financial controller, director, but someone that absolutely keeps you hot on that discipline.
Definitely.
That's just the way I run business. I listen to some of these fantastical stories where they're blowing money on all sorts of things, and that seems like a very different way of running business. But I've always been keen to understand from day one exactly when we've become profitable, be loyal to my shareholders in delivering to that promise, and just having the discipline on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to say, have I not hit those metrics?
Yeah. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
I'd certainly say, give it a crack. Go, have a go. For all of the, maybe I'm just a whinging pom. For all of any negativity I've given over, I'd certainly say I've absolutely, it's been a life-changing journey for me, and not in a financial sense. I should add that the car that I was driving away in this morning was not a fancy one still. I don't know if it's right that business owners get to drive fancy cars. Someone hasn't enabled me to do that. But I would do it all again for everything that I've learned, people that I've met. So it'd just be a sort of fatherly pat on the back, I think, and say, go get them, give it a go.
Great. Well, thanks for your time today, Ed. I think the audience get a lot of value out of your journey that you've shared with us, and congratulations on the phenomenal growth and making it through all the bumps and bruises as we know as small business owners. But I think that is tremendous success, and congratulations to you and Peter and the management team and the wider team.
Thanks, Troy, and just a shout out again to Charles and Team Logistics for hooking us up. Really enjoyed it.
Great, thank you. And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.